the god of thunder, the prince of Asgard, the strongest Avenger. Point Break. Whatever you want to call him, no character in the Marvel Comics lineup is more larger than life than Thor. With a rich history rooted in Norse mythology, the character of Thor has captivated audiences since his debut in 1962, all the way up to 2019's highly anticipated Avengers Endgame. The saga of Thor is an epic one to say the least. So let's take a look at the God of Thunder's evolution from comics to the big screen, and smash this video like the hammer of Milner.
Mjolnir?
I mean, Mueller.
What's Mjolnir?
No, wait. Mjolnir! It's Mjolnir! Created by Stan Lee and Larry Lieber during the Silver Age of comic books, Thor Odinson leapt from the pages of the August 1962 issue of Journey into Mystery number 83. Thor's arrival was a dose of something new for the Marvel Comics library, and it's one that has continued to shine and evolve for over 50 years. In a bid to create literally the strongest character possible, Stan Lee decided that the only route to go in order to give said character their strength was to make him a god. According to the man himself, Lee has stated on multiple occasions that Thor is, in fact, the strongest out of all the Marvel Comics characters, including the Incredible Hulk himself. Sorry, buddy. Thor's inception was one that was crafted in an effort to have a hero that stood out amongst an already sterling lineup of characters. Following hot on the heels of Spider-Man, Iron Man, and the other well-known canon of characters that had already captured readers' attentions for a good spell, the persona of Thor was a larger-than-life hero with an extravagant and mythical essence that allowed for countless storyline opportunities that are still being explored today. Created during an artistic expansion of the Marvel Comics franchise, Thor's history, while heavily influenced by his Nordic roots, has Stan Lee's classic thumbprints and spin ingrained in his very DNA. Lee felt that the Greek and Roman mythologies, while ripe with story and character delineation, was territory that had been well covered by other artists and authors. And once he stumbled onto Norse legends and fables, he realized he could tap into a mythos that could provide him with ample story opportunities and dynamics that could play out for decades. Thor's backstory and arc is one that focused on humility, the cost and arrogance associated with intense physical strength, and the conflict that arises with everyday family dynamics, played out in front of a regal and vibrant backdrop, set against the cosmos. Thor may have gotten his start in 1962, but it wasn't until 1966 that he received his own series in The Mighty Thor, number 126. Hailing from his home planet of Asgard, Thor, the son of King Odin, protector of the Nine Realms, and his mother Jord, begins his journey as an arrogant and somewhat superficial demigod whose unbounded strength and power leads him to a mindset of arrogance and brash approaches to living. With his son assuming an arrogant and childlike form that he's groomed, and ready to take the reins of Asgard, Odin, sensing that his son was due for a hefty reality check, wipes Thor's mind and banishes him from Asgard, much to the dismay of his own family, but very much to the delight of his brother Loki. Arriving on Earth in the body of a disabled medical student by the name of Donald Blake, and with no memory of his previous life apart from his identity, Thor proceeds on his journey of self-discovery and learns the lessons of humility Odin was striving for. During his tenure on Earth, Thor, going by his alter ego Blake, becomes a doctor and learns the concepts of what it means to be flawed and human, how to care for people, and how to use his skills for their betterment rather than bask in his own selfish fulfillment. During his journey on Earth, Thor falls in love with the beautiful and brilliant Jane Foster, who assists in his mission of self-discovery as Dr. Blake sets about living the best life possible. Blake goes from arrogant to aware, and eventually, his true origins come to light when he strikes his walking stick and discovers it to be his famous hammer, Mjolnir, in disguise. He then starts to piece together his Asgardian history and learns why he was sent to Earth in the first place. After discovering who he truly is, Thor then sets about living a double life as Blake and Thor in a bid to save humanity on all fronts. Doctor by day, kind of, and brawny and mighty savior by night, Thor becomes one of the Earth's most valuable assets when he staves off an alien attack in Norway led by his brother Loki. Thor would continue to battle his brother and use his alter ego identity as Blake in further iterations of the series before eventually joining our well-known and well-loved Avengers, as well as participating in several other outings and cameos in the Marvel Comics canon, including when Jane Foster herself ends up wielding the hammer and becoming, you guessed it, the Goddess of Thunder. In the MCU adaptations, Thor's essence and history are preserved, but with slight variations and tweaks, and comedic touches were integrated into the character, starting with the 2011 Kenneth Branagh film Thor, to update the character and attract modern-day audiences. Thor, like in the comics, is banished to Earth to learn lessons of humility after a bitter feud with his father and brother on their home planet of Asgard. However, instead of going down the same route of the original comic storyline, Thor's identity as Dr. Blake, while referenced in comedic fashion in one particular scene,
his name is Donald Blake.
Dr. Donald Blake.
Is fully aware of who he is and the powers that have been stripped from him as he attempts to regain his strength and his resignation in a small New Mexico town. It's here that he meets Jane Foster and sets about defending the people of Earth from the incoming assault led by his trickster brother Loki. The MCU adaptation of Thor, played with a brilliant balance of humor, strength and humanity by Chris Hemsworth, saw a slight shift in tone that allowed him to be less brooding and melodramatic than his comic book origins. Once Thor and his Asgardian buddies stave off Loki's plot to dominate and rule the Earth, he returns to Asgard and sets about defending his home in the Nine Realms with a newfound humbleness that makes him stronger and more capable than he was before. Much like the comics, Thor's storyline in the MCU films continued to focus on the relationship with his brother Loki, while showcasing a never-ending journey of self-discovery and rediscovery that has played out with grace and humor throughout all of the on-screen representations. What's most noteworthy about the MCU films is the more human and light-hearted approach that Thor has gotten compared to his printed representation. While still preserving the core elements that make the God of Thunder the hammer-wielding badass he is, many everyday audience members find the character of Thor to lack a particular human element that has been seen in other MCU film characters. While the level of enjoyment and critical reception with Thor has been pretty high since his arrival on screen in 2011, after the somewhat lukewarm reception of elements of Thor: The Dark World, a slight revamping of the character came about in his third titular outing, Thor: Ragnarok, which showcased Thor at his all-time best. With the comedic intuition and direction of Taika Waititi taking control of the steering wheel, Thor: Ragnarok steered the character and material in a stark and fresh direction that had only been touched lightly on in the previous films, with flashes and resemblances to the reception of the first Iron Man present in many elements of the final product, and Jeff Goldblum was just...
What? Wow.
Enough said. When Ragnarok arrived, audiences were unequivocally delighted to witness Thor in a brilliant film that not only brought some freshness to the franchise, but evolved the character to an emotional and thought-provoking pinnacle that had paved the way for his final showdown in Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame. Thor's appearance has held a pretty consistent aesthetic throughout time. Being one of the longest running and most popular characters, the visual flair of Thor has preserved his helmet, flaxen mane, red cape, and Asgardian steel hauberk throughout most of his appearances. Physically, while Thor has always been a more than shredded guy, he's seen some changes with his head and facial hair that have shown him clean-shaven to sporting a ponytail and full-on beard. There were many variations in style while still maintaining the baseline of Thor's appearances with drastic visual contrasts, such as Thor's run in the 90s. Oh, the 90s! A lot of the styles in the comic books are also reflected in his MCU film adaptations, with a more traditional appearing Thor in the 2011 installment of Thor remaining intact, until his short-haired and bearded ruggedness brought about in Thor: Ragnarok, in which the character started to take on a more disheveled and less polished appearance than his earlier films. When looking at the powers and abilities of Thor, these elements have remained unchanged since his inception, maintaining his status as the most powerful Avenger consistently, and making him, perhaps, the most invulnerable of the characters in the Marvel Comics lineup. Again, Hulk buddy, it's true. Sorry, man. Regarding the powers of Thor, he has always maintained the superhuman strength that he draws from the Norse gods, providing him with physiology that makes him invulnerable, offers superhuman stamina, self-sustenance, and superhuman speed. One of his greatest assets, undoubtedly, is also his ability to fly, with the assistance of his hammer Mjolnir. While Thor isn't entirely invincible, he can heal much faster than human beings and can take a beating better than Schwarzenegger in his most cheesed up outings. This also provides Thor with superhuman senses, longevity, and an ability to look amazingly young, even though he's technically an older fella. Along with Mjolnir, and finally showcased in Avengers Infinity War, Thor's other well-known piece of weaponry comes in the form of Stormbreaker, an enchanted axe which its crafter, Eitri, claims to be the most powerful weapon in the Asgardians' arsenal. Though some are split on it being the strongest weapon in Thor's armory, fans were nonetheless delighted to see his battle axe tear up the screen in the final showdown with Thanos, a ferocity only the god of thunder could conjure. Along with having physical advantages, Thor possesses, as stated in his name, the ability to control weather since birth. Usually relying on his hammer to control the weather and release blasts of lightning, Thor has shown his capability to do it without his trusted Mjolnir.
Are you Thor, the god of hammers?
Such as the moment in the climax of Thor Ragnarok. He's also a master combatant and tactician, a master of weapons, who can devastate his enemies with a brute yet coordinated force. While much of the series in print relied on mythos and magic to fuel Thor's might, in the film versions, there's a more reality-based explanation given to his abilities. While Thor still is a demigod, it's described by Hemsworth in the first Thor that science is what makes up his abilities.
Your ancestors called it magic, and you call it science.
And that it's at such an advanced stage that us puny mortals simply don't have the ability yet to comprehend it. Regardless, Thor maintains his status as the most formidable member of the team, and he often likes to remind people of that fact.
I like this one.
The villains of Thor are plentiful and formidable. Featuring antagonists that match Thor's strengths and abilities, the character has gone toe-to-toe with some of the most significant baddies in the universe. In the comics, Thor saw himself go up against foes like his lover and enemy Enchantress, Executioner, Midgard's Serpent, and other gods and goddesses rooted in Asgardian mythology that kept our good old mighty Thor on his toes on more than one occasion. Some of the most well-known villains saw the privilege of being brought to the MCU film series in some of the most exceptional performances and visual displays to ever grace the screen. Those that must be mentioned are quite easy to recall, including that of the goddess of death Hela, a character featured in the comics and brought to the big screen in Thor Ragnarok by the phenomenal Cate Blanchett. Hela, one of the most malicious personas, even once turned Thor's bones brittle and brought him to the cusp of death. In the comics, Hela is Loki's daughter. However, in the films, Hela is written as the lost sister of Thor. She complemented the long-running dynamic of the members of Thor's family struggling for one of them to take control of the throne. Along with the goddess of death being pulled from the source material, Destroyer, a mythical suit of armor created and enchanted by Odin, and appearing pretty much exactly how he was shown in the comics, is one of the first and most extravagant villains featured in the first Thor film, who quite literally set fire to the screen. Without a doubt, however, Thor's longest running and most consistent antagonist is that of his brother Loki. Loki, his foster brother and the Norse god of mischief, is continually battling and jabbing Thor for not only the rule of Asgard, but also the entire fate of the universe. A plot point which served as the basis for the plot of the first Avengers film. It's apparent from the start that Loki would perhaps be the potential downfall of Thor, with the character struggling to satisfy his thirst for power while occasionally attempting to do the right thing. What is most intriguing about Thor's relationship with Loki is the love-hate dynamic between the two of them. Both of them find themselves torn between destroying the other and preserving their brotherhood, with no apparent end or outcome in sight. It's a beautiful story arc that not only provides for a litany of drama, but also portrays a very accurate look at the relationship between siblings. Played with a suave and devious stroke by the excellent Tom Hiddleston, the hate for Loki is almost matched by the love, with constant surreptitious motives at play and living up to his name as the ultimate trickster, Loki has been one of the longest running and most sinister MCU film villains that fans just can't get enough of. Along with the pizzazz that is Loki, the constant headbutting between Loki and Thor reflects the human qualities that many of us can identify with. Seeking our parents' approval, living up to familial expectations, and loving somebody no matter what the cost. The dynamic of Loki and Thor is one that has not only been utterly entertaining, but strikes a chord with human beings and draws us even closer to the characters. While Thor doesn't really have any sidekicks per se, unless you want to count his hammer, his list of friends is filled with a deep bench of some of the best personalities featured in the Marvel series. Of all the Marvel comic heroes, Thor's family lineage and closest comrades are plentiful and colourful, with each one providing a crucial factor to his journey through the 9 realms. One of the easiest relationships that come to mind is his father, Odin. The All-Father and ruler of Asgard, based on the deity of the same name, is one of the beings that Thor receives most of his knowledge and lessons from. Odin is the man that Thor wants to live up to and impress, and through his father's teachings, Thor learns that the experiences for him to be had in life are challenging and many. Odin, played by master thespian Anthony Hopkins, wonderfully encapsulates Odin in his on-screen appearances and further lends credibility to the Shakespearean-like drama that Thor has been noted for having. Along with Odin, one of the more recognised supporting characters comes in the form of Jane Foster, a nurse in the comic books until earning her PhD in the films. Jane Foster is one of the most significant elements that helps curb Thor's ego and gets him in touch with humanity, while also serving as his most significant love interest. As stated before, Jane also takes up Thor's hammer at one point and becomes the goddess of thunder, but that's before Odin gets peeved off and strips her of her powers. Thanks, Dad. Other notable characters backing up the God of Thunder in the comics include Thor's stepbrother and closest friend Baldur, Volstagg, Fandral, Hogun, Sif, featured in 2011's Thor, Valkyrie, one of the most prominent supporting members in Thor Ragnarok, and naturally, the ever-loyal and golden-eyed protector of the Bifrost, Heimdall, played by the well-liked and astoundingly good Idris Elba. Just like Thor himself, many of the characters' transitions from paper to screen remained intact, with subtle variations made to adapt them to the big screen. When looking at some of his greatest allies, the Avengers, there's a strong foundation and friendship to be found with each of the characters. However, one cannot help but notice a notable emphasis on his rapport with the Incredible Hulk. Being that the Hulk is the closest one to match Thor's strength, their ongoing relationship and constant tug of war is a cornerstone of the Thor franchise and represented in a wonderful and comedic fashion in Thor Ragnarok. Thor and Hulk, in many ways, are characters that suffer from many of the same emotional problems.
We're the same, you and I. We're just a couple of hot-headed fools.
So it's no mystery why they experience such natural gravitation toward one another, in many situations that pay off in hilarious and even brutal ways. Every associate of Thor possesses an ability to appeal to his emotions and his ego, providing constant stepping stones for Thor as he makes his journey in both the comics and the MCU film series. While Thor is strong enough on his own, his allies certainly assist in helping him focus that power in the right direction. The character of Thor has been able to stand the test of time for good reason. Since his start in 1962, the draw of the Prince of Asgard is perfectly understandable due to his powerful and flashy exterior and Shakespearean-like essence. But it's the elements of his self-discovery and his personal investment in humankind that appeals to comic book aficionados and everyday people alike. Thor may be a god, but his soul is as human as they come. While much of the character has remained constant throughout his decades in existence, the themes of family, brotherhood, betterment, and other human ingredients that are staples of the Marvel Comics base have drawn us to the character and still do to this day. With Avengers Endgame bringing a close to much of what we know of Thor's current manifestation, one can only speculate where the franchise will be taken from here. But it's safe to assume, however, that no matter what happens to our well-revered Thor Odinson, wherever our favourite Asgardian hero gravitates towards next will be a place that everyone will flock to the minute they hear his mighty clap of thunder. And hopefully, just maybe, Jeff Goldblum will show up again, simply because he's awesome.
So, you're welcome.
Now comes the time where you tell us how we did. How well did we cover the God of Thunder and the impact he's had on the MCU? Is there anything we may have missed? Let us know what you think in the comments section below, and click subscribe for more videos from your friends at CBR. Thanks for watching.